The new Sivir is incredible. After her mini rework, she started dominating the ranked ladders right away, and even after multiple nerfs, Sivir is still one of the best AD carries you can play in your ranked games. But how do you need to play her exactly to get the best results? Why is she so strong all of a sudden? Her abilities are still very similar to what they used to be, right? Right? Well, yes, but no. Sivir turned from a total pushover into a true late-game menace that also fits onto pretty much any team composition. While her abilities look quite familiar, the changes to the individual mechanics gave birth to an entirely new Sivir playstyle. In order to show you how that works exactly, we will now have a look at how Sivir is played in Korean Challenger solo queue, since Korean players are known to be highly creative, which means they are likely the first to find the most optimal strategies. Real quick, I want to give a shout out to Sevenus, who left a super thanks comment on one of my other videos. That was quite the pleasant surprise, thank you for your support. Anyway, the first thing you need to know is that Lethality Sivir is completely dead, and that crit items are your only viable options now. The reason for this is that Sivir's Q base damage and attack damage scalings got nerfed quite hard, which means that the payoff you get from stacking AD and armor penetration is much smaller these days. However, Sivir's Q spell got buffed in another way, as its damage now scales with critical strike chance, pushing Sivir clearly towards a build with critical strike items. The second big change that comes with huge implications for Sivir's item choices is the update to Sivir's W spell. Prior to the rework, W only amplified your next 3 auto attacks with its ricochet bounces, which meant you needed as much attack damage and crit as possible in order to get maximum value out of your set number of empowered attacks. Nowadays though, instead of just 3 attacks, your W remains active for a flat amount of time. It empowers Sivir's attacks for 4 seconds no matter how many times you manage to strike. Consequentially, the new Sivir gets much more value from purchasing attack speed items than her prior iteration. But before we dive deep into the intricacies of Sivir's itemization, let's first have a look at the most impactful change. I'm obviously talking about the update to Sivir's ultimate. The spell has always been an amazing tool for catching enemies out of position, and the rework hasn't changed that at all. Once the opponent is overcommitted, there is no way they are able to disengage again when you can enable your entire team to run after them. Movement speed is the most broken stat in the game, and champions are balanced around how quickly they can close the distance during fights. Therefore, especially the bruisers and tanks on your team just love Sivir's ultimate, and this spell ensures you will always be useful even when you are behind. But what truly makes Sivir such a big threat right now is her ultimate's new reset mechanic. Prior to the buffs, you always had to make a crucial decision. You could either ult early for engage or disengage, or you could ult later in a fight for cleanup. But now, Sivir's ultimate will remain active for the entire duration of the fight, no matter how long the fight will be. As long as there is a target you can attack, even if it is just the enemy frontline, your ricochet damage will ensure that you fulfill your ultimate's reset requirements. Movement speed is an important stat on Sivir herself due to her limited attack range, but on the tanks and bruisers on your team it is outright broken. The fact you can now have this for the entire duration of a teamfight is the single biggest buff Sivir got, and the main reason she is so popular in high elo solo queue. Yes, late game Sivir has always been a monster, but after this buff she can solo win games with her damage and utility. Okay, so Sivir with her amazing crit scaling and massive team fighting ultimate is a late game powerhouse, and once you get there you can close out games easily. So far so good. But what about the lane phase? Isn't the base damage nerf to her Q and all the changes to her base stats in general a huge blow to her already weak early game? How can you reach the late game in the first place? While it is true that Sivir needs some time to scale, her laning is not as weak as you might think at first glance. Her Q still deals massive damage when you can combo it off your support's crowd control so it connects with both hits. Combine that with Sivir's passive movement speed ensuring you can stay in auto attack range at all times, and you actually got yourself a decent early game duelist. In fact, Sivir's early dueling power got secretly buffed since they gave the attack speed boost that was attached to her ultimate to her W spell instead. Having access to that extra early attack speed is massive, since attack speed is the most important combat stats for early game fights. However, keep in mind that it is still true that the laning phase is the most vulnerable point in the game for Sivir, and especially when your support cannot reliably lock down your opponents to set up your Q, your early game will be rather shaky. The spell is a huge part of your damage output, so whenever you are facing an AD carry who has reliable single target DPS, you should never ever try to fight them when your Q is not guaranteed. You would essentially be counting on them being a bad player when you do this, and you of course never want to give away your agency to your opponents. Instead, you should be looking for situations in which you can portray your own skills, whereas the enemy's skill level ideally doesn't even matter. Since people in high elo Korean solo queue are mechanically extremely gifted, the Sivir mains over there are quick to find exactly these opportunities. They save their skill shot as a follow-up tool for guaranteed damage, which is almost equal to a guaranteed one fight. Additionally, they patiently hold onto Sivir's spell shields to block the most impactful abilities on reaction, which means the play is still decided by their own mechanical skill and not by their opponents. In general, Sivir's spell shield is a huge aspect of your skill expression. Using it out of panic when your enemy can simply wait it out, and using it deliberately when your enemy is either forced to use a high impact spell, or when you are directly reacting to a spell's cast animation, is a night and day difference. Without spell shield, Sivir is an immobile, short-ranged marksman that is easily preyed upon. When you consistently block your opponent's most important ability, on the other hand, you can actively bait your opponents and punish their greed. It is not just you getting out of many dangerous situations completely for free, you are also saving your teammates lots of trouble at the same time. A high-impact crowd control spell thrown at you is always equal to that same spell not being thrown at your allies. Getting good at spell shielding consistently requires lots of game knowledge and presence of mind. No, not the rune, but the payoff is enormous. And it is honestly the only difficult aspect of Sivir's game plan. In general, playing macro with this champion is so insanely easy that even just adhering to the most basic principles will yield you crazy results. Your wave clear mid-game with W is unpunishable, keeps your opponents busy, and maximizes your farm all at the same time. Push past river roam strategies are very efficient with this champion, and any opponent foolish enough to stay near the wave will get chipped quite significantly by your bounces. When they get frustrated and try to farm against you regardless, you will have such a big health advantage on them that even the strongest 1v1 champions in the game can no longer threaten you. The enemy is truly in a lose-lose situation here, since when they don't contest you, you punish them extremely hard as well. After eating the wave in no time, your own minions start running down their towers, and towers win games after all. This is not to say, however, that you should just be playing PvE. Far from it, in fact. While nerfed during the early game, once you start getting some crit items and unlock your Q's critical hit scalings, your damage output just starts skyrocketing. Even with just one item, you can get the enemy to half health before the fight even starts, giving them no chance to fight back. You force them to retreat and then extend your lead even more by taking free towers and minion waves. And while prior to the changes, Sivir's Q fell off quite hard in the late game, it is nowadays also a potent teamfighting tool. The reason for this is not just the new crit scaling, but also the fact its cast time gets reduced by bonus attack speed. This allows you to get this spell off in the late game much more quickly, which means you do not lose out on auto attack damage whatsoever for casting it. Your Q being a viable late game tool also fixes one of Sivir's biggest problems, which is her limited auto attack range. If you use your Q mindfully and go for guaranteed hits off your allies' crowd control, or when the enemy is stuck in choke points, Sivir turns from a high-risk, high-reward champion into one of the safest marksmen in the game. Okay, so now that you know how to best utilize all of Sivir's amazing new tools, the only things left are your optimal rune and item choices. You go for Lethal Tempo, Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline, and Cutdown, with Magical Footwear and Biscuit Delivery secondary. Your shards are Attack Speed, Adaptive Force, and Armor vs Physical Marksman, and Magic Resist vs Bot Lane AP carries. Not only does Lethal Tempo perfectly synergize with Sivir's new W, allowing you to get more empowered attacks off during its 4 seconds window, but it also fixes Sivir's range. Her short attack range meant that approaching the enemy backline has always been extremely risky in the past, but now you can simply stack your keystone on the enemy frontline and then clean up the fight with Lethal Tempo's bonus range. The free boots from Magical Footwear further help you with that by giving you bonus movement speed, but the rune of course also saves you 300 gold. Sivir is a ticking time bomb, since as soon as you reach your 3 crit items power spike, you can completely take over the game. Even just the 300 gold saved from not needing to buy boots will go a long way, giving you earlier access to your real items. And you want to be on the inspiration path anyway, because having access to both biscuits and presence of mind makes your mana pool much more consistent. Especially nowadays, these mana runes are even more important since your spell shield no longer refunds mana but instead provides you with health. Korean players just love the rune Cutdown, doubling down on Sivir's already amazing late game by making her even more efficient against enemy frontline champions, but Coup de Grace is certainly a viable alternative. Legend Bloodline is an important source of lifesteal, freeing up your item slots for more damage-oriented options. It needs some time to kick into gear though, so Korean Challenger Sivir players always start with Doran's Blade. Its Omnivamp goes a long way during the mid-game, and by the time you sell it, your Legend Bloodline will be fully stacked. Since Sivir is all about kiting to outplay enemy tanks and compensate for her short range, you want to complete Berserker's Greaves as soon as your free boots arrive. Your first real item though is the mythic item of Kraken Slayer. Some of you might have expected Gale Force for even better kiting, but Kraken Slayer is actually even more important. Sivir will mainly be hitting enemy frontline champions, and Kraken Slayer's true damage ensures they cannot just ignore you while running down your allies. Additionally, it provides the highest amount of attack speed out of all mythic items, which of course means you get even more W bounces during your 4 seconds window. Korean players were quick to understand that Phantom Dancer is Sivir's best second item, while some ignorant NA players, like the former pro player Sneaky for example, were still arguing the case for items like Collector second. While Collector would have been an okay choice for old Sivir, who was limited to just 3 Ws per cast, which meant you needed to make each ricochet as impactful as possible, the death by 1000 cuts approach with Phantom Dancer is much more efficient with new Sivir. The item is incredibly cheap, has amazing synergies with Kraken Slayer and Lethal Tempo, and further amplifies Sivir's kiting with its extra movement speed. To give you a simplified but digestible example, it just doesn't matter if you make your W bounces twice as strong or if you instead fire off twice as many. Both approaches are theoretically viable, but Phantom Dancer has much better overall synergies with Sivir's playstyle than any of the other options. Your third item is of course Infinity Edge, completing your massive 3-item power spike. Afterwards, the most standard late game choices are Lord Dominic's Regards and Bloodthirster. Getting either of them before the other can be viable depending on the game state. Lord Doms is naturally the better damage item, but you don't deal any damage when you're dead, so Bloodthirster 4th will sometimes be necessary. Of course, the fact that Sivir is very strong right now is not exactly a secret, so what can you do when your opponent picks her away from you? How do you counter this crazy champion? Well, one of the best Sivir counters in the game is Draven. Draven simply destroys her, so if you want to pick up Draven yourself to punish opposing Sivirs, you get all the information you need by clicking the link on your screen right there.